What if the wisest king in the Bible almost lost everything? Not to enemies, but to spirits he thought he controlled. You're watching The Forbidden Bible, where the hidden war of angels and demons, the ancient prophecies sealed for the last days, and the forbidden mysteries of Scripture are revealed with cinematic clarity. If you're new here, subscribe and tap the bell icon, because what you're about to discover may change the way you understand heaven, the unseen realm, and your place within it. When people hear the name Solomon, they think of stability, a peaceful reign, unmatched wisdom, a king chosen by God himself. Solomon wasn't famous for war. He wasn't remembered for conquest. He was known for judgment, for insight, for seeing what others could not. The Bible tells us that when Solomon became king, God appeared to him and offered him anything he desired. Solomon didn't ask for riches. He didn't ask for long life. He didn't ask for the death of his enemies. He asked for wisdom, and God gave it abundantly. So much wisdom that kings crossed deserts just to hear him speak. So much insight that his words became proverbs, still quoted thousands of years later. So much authority that his reign became the gold standard of Israel's history. Solomon built the temple of the Lord, the most sacred structure Israel had ever known, a place where heaven and earth were believed to meet. From the outside, everything looked secure, blessed, untouchable. But here is the detail most people miss. The Bible tells us what Solomon built. It does not tell us everything Solomon handled. Because wisdom, when combined with authority, can create a dangerous illusion. The illusion that understanding something means you control it. The illusion that insight makes you immune. The illusion that proximity to God removes the risk of falling away. And according to ancient traditions preserved outside Scripture, Solomon didn't just rule people. He was believed to have authority over something far more dangerous. Not armies, not nations, but forces no human was meant to command. And that is where this story truly begins. Solomon's wisdom did not exist in isolation. In the ancient world, wisdom was never just about clever words or legal decisions. True wisdom meant understanding how the world worked, seen and unseen. And this is where the story takes a turn most people never hear. Outside the pages of Scripture, preserved in ancient traditions and texts like the Testament of Solomon, there is a claim that unsettled readers for centuries. It says Solomon was given more than insight, more than understanding, more than discernment. He was given authority. According to these traditions, Solomon received a ring not as jewelry, but as a symbol. A ring engraved with a divine seal, representing God's authority, not Solomon's own power. This detail matters, because the ring itself was not magic. It did nothing on its own. Its power came from what it represented: obedience, alignment, and permission granted by God. With this seal, Solomon was believed to have authority over spiritual forces that afflicted humanity. Not angels of heaven, but spirits associated with chaos, corruption, and human weakness. Now, pause for a moment. Imagine the burden of that responsibility. A man trusted with wisdom, now trusted with command over forces that destroy minds, families, and nations. The traditions say Solomon did not immediately dominate these spirits. He questioned them, interrogated them, forced them to reveal their names and functions. Because in the ancient mindset, to know a name was to expose a weakness. And slowly, one by one, 72 spirits were identified, each one associated with a specific form of human suffering: anger that turns brother against brother, desire that dissolves marriages, pride that blinds leaders, fear that paralyzes the innocent, illness that strikes without warning, despair that whispers there is no escape. These were not random monsters. They were reflections of the fractures already present in the human heart. And according to the tradition, Solomon bound them not to glorify himself, but to restrain their influence. Here is the unsettling part. These same spirits were then forced into labor during the construction of the temple, the most sacred structure in Israel, built not only by human hands, but by unwilling forces compelled to serve a purpose they hated. This detail disturbed ancient readers, and for good reason. It raised an uncomfortable question. If even darkness can be forced to serve God's plan, does that mean the one holding authority is safe? Or does it mean he is standing dangerously close to the edge? Because authority over evil does not eliminate evil. It only delays its response. And power, even when granted, carries a risk, especially when the one holding it begins to believe the authority belongs to him. The traditions make something very clear. The spirits were never loyal. They never repented. They never changed. They obeyed because they were restrained. And they waited. They waited for Solomon's alignment to weaken, for obedience to blur into confidence, for reverence to slowly become assumption. Because the seal did not respond to intelligence. It responded to faithfulness. And the moment faithfulness erodes, authority follows. Solomon did not lose control overnight. It slipped quietly, gradually, invisibly. And by the time the danger became obvious, the foundation had already cracked. This is where many people misunderstand the story. When ancient traditions speak of Solomon's 72 demons, they are not describing random horrors lurking in the dark. They are describing patterns. Each spirit was identified not by how it looked, but by what it did. According to these accounts, Solomon demanded more than submission. He demanded understanding. Each spirit was questioned. Each was forced to confess its influence. And what they revealed was unsettling because none of it was unfamiliar. One spirit confessed it stirred anger until brothers turned on each other. Another admitted it inflamed desire until loyalty collapsed. Another whispered pride into the minds of rulers until they mistook power for destiny. Others worked quietly. One brought sickness without warning. Another filled the minds of the fearful with dread. Another pushed the desperate toward cliffs, convincing them there was no way back. These were not myths designed to frighten children. They were explanations for why human behavior repeatedly breaks in the same places. The ancient world understood something we often forget. Evil rarely announces itself as evil. It enters as impulse, as justification, as permission. And this is why the number matters. 72 was not chosen at random. In ancient thinking, it represented completeness, the full range of corruption affecting humanity. In other words, these spirits symbolize the entire spectrum of human weakness. This reframes Solomon's authority in a dangerous way, because if these spirits mirror human struggle, then controlling them outwardly does not mean mastering them inwardly. And here lies the central tension. Solomon restrained the external forces. But restraint is not the same as transformation. The traditions say the spirits obeyed, but they did not submit. They worked, but they watched. They labored, but they listened. They were bound, but never loyal. They studied Solomon. They learned his routines. They observed his confidence. They noticed when wisdom turned into certainty. And slowly, something shifted. Solomon began to believe that knowledge equaled safety. That insight created immunity. That because he understood darkness, darkness no longer threatened him. This is the most dangerous stage of authority. When vigilance fades, when caution feels unnecessary, when control feels permanent. And the spirits waited. because authority that depends on alignment can only last as long as alignment remains intact. The moment obedience weakens, influence returns, and Solomon did not see it happening, because collapse rarely announces itself with disaster. It begins with comfort, and that is exactly where this story is heading. The fall did not begin with rebellion. It began with permission. Scripture itself tells us that Solomon loved many foreign women, political marriages, diplomatic alliances, relationships that secured peace and expanded influence. At first, there was no crisis, no lightning, no divine warning, no visible consequence, just accommodation. Solomon did not abandon God overnight. He did not renounce the temple he built. He did not declare allegiance to other gods. He simply made room for customs that were not his own, room for altars that were not dedicated to the Lord, room for practices, he told himself, were harmless. After all, he was wise. He understood cultures. He knew symbolism. He believed he could separate ritual from devotion. And this is where the illusion deepened, because compromise rarely feels like betrayal when it first appears. It feels reasonable, even compassionate. A shrine built for peace, an altar allowed for diplomacy, a practice tolerated for love. Each choice seemed small, but every small allowance weakened alignment. And alignment was the source of authority. According to the ancient traditions, this is when the seal began to dim, not abruptly, not dramatically, quietly. The authority Solomon once exercised with clarity now required effort. The restraint he once commanded effortlessly began to resist. The spirits he had bound did not break free immediately. They stirred. They sensed imbalance, because they were never bound by intelligence. They were restrained by obedience, and obedience was no longer undivided. Scripture tells us Solomon's heart was turned away, not violently, not suddenly, gradually. The king who once prayed for wisdom now tolerated what wisdom warned against, and as his heart drifted, his authority followed. This is the part most people overlook. The loss of power came before the chaos. The danger arrived long before the disaster. And by the time Solomon recognized the cost, the foundation had already weakened. Because the most dangerous compromise is the one that feels justified. And once alignment fractures, control becomes an illusion. The spirits were still bound, but they were no longer silent, and they were waiting for one final opening. The collapse did not come with fire from heaven. It came with silence. According to ancient tradition, the moment finally arrived when Solomon lost the ring. Some say it slipped from his hand. Others say it was taken. Others say he surrendered it in a moment of weakness. The accounts differ, but they all agree on what followed. The seal was broken, and when alignment was lost, restraint vanished instantly. What rose next was not chaos in the streets. It was something far more dangerous: influence. The 72 spirits did not surge forward like an invading army. They spread like a disease. Without restraint, their reach expanded rapidly, not through force, but through thought. Anger intensified inside homes. Suspicion spread among leaders. Fear crept into places that had known peace for generations. The palace felt it first. Advisors contradicted one another. Judgments lost clarity. Decisions that once came with wisdom now bred confusion. Then the city felt it. Merchants grew ruthless overnight. Neighbors turned on neighbors over trivial disputes. Justice bent under pressure. It could no longer resist. And then something even more alarming happened. The temple felt it. The sacrifices were still offered. The incense still rose. The rituals continued without interruption. But the weight was gone. The prayers felt empty. Worship continued, but heaven felt distant. According to the tradition, some of the spirits targeted judgment itself. They distorted wisdom. They twisted discernment. They blurred truth until leaders could no longer tell conviction from manipulation. This was no longer about Solomon. This was about Israel. The corruption had reached every layer: leadership, people, and worship. And that is when the threshold was crossed. Because when corruption reaches the heart of worship, covenant itself is endangered. The traditions describe the spirits mocking Solomon, not with violence, with certainty. You believed wisdom was enough. You thought authority belonged to you. You mistook permission for ownership. Solomon sat on his throne, ring gone, clarity shattered, and understood too late what he had truly lost. Not wisdom, not wealth, not reputation, but covering. And once covering is removed, chaos does not need permission to grow. It multiplies. What was released that night was too dangerous to remain unchecked, and heaven could no longer remain silent. There are moments when patience becomes permission. This was not one of them. According to the tradition, when the corruption reached leadership, people and worship heaven responded. God sent Michael, not as a warning, not as a message, but as a boundary. Michael's name itself answered the crisis. Who is like God? Where Solomon's authority had fractured, Michael's alignment was absolute. This was not delegated power, not symbolic restraint. This was direct intervention. The unrest recoiled. The spirits hesitated, not because they were forced, but because they recognized authority they could not challenge. Michael did not arrive to shame Solomon. He arrived to stop what Solomon could no longer stop, because the issue was no longer a king's failure. It was a nation at risk, and heaven does not abandon covenant. When Michael took his stand, the unseen became visible. The 72 spirits no longer hid behind influence alone. They revealed themselves. Some rose as towering forms, bodies twisted like serpents, heads shaped like lions or wolves, eyes burning with a cold, deliberate intelligence. Others appeared tall and gaunt, parodies of men, their movements unnatural, their voices layered, as if more than one presence spoke at once. Some took shapes meant to deceive, figures of beauty, radiant, alluring, almost human, crafted to disarm, distract, and distort judgment. Others were less defined, shadows with weight, smoke given intention, forms that bent the air around them, pressing dread into the senses. This was not random monstrosity. Each form reflected its purpose. Rage wore claws. Deception wore beauty. Fear wore emptiness, and they moved together. The spirits surged toward Michael, not as chaos, but as coordination. Fear struck first, a wave meant to overwhelm. Then confusion, voices clashing, reality blurring. Then pressure, attempting to smother the light itself. Michael advanced. Light flared from him like fire drawn into a blade. Where his authority struck, forms fractured, not exploding, but unraveling, their shapes collapsing back into smoke and distortion. But they did not retreat. For every form driven back, others closed in. A lion-headed figure lunged, roaring defiance. A winged shadow wrapped around the light, trying to extinguish it. A beautiful figure stepped forward, speaking words meant to seduce hesitation. The traditions emphasize this moment. Michael was not defeated, but he was surrounded. 72 manifestations of corruption pressed from every side. A system of darkness acting as one. The city felt the strain. The ground trembled. The temple shuddered. Fear rippled through Jerusalem as the boundary between worlds thinned. And then Michael did not strike again. He called His voice cut through the collision like thunder, and heaven answered. The sky itself seemed to open. Ranks of angels descended, not chaotic, not furious, but precise. Light multiplied. Where shadows gathered, angels formed lines. Where distortion spread, clarity returned. The spirits fought back. Forms twisted violently. Shadows surged. Voices screamed defiance. But the advantage was gone. This was no longer one against many. It was order against chaos. One by one, the forms were driven back. Some were bound in light, their shapes collapsing as restraints closed around them. Others were forced downward beneath the earth, beneath the waters sealed from influence. The monstrous shapes dissolved. The alluring forms faded. The shadows lost their weight. Silence followed. Michael stood unmoved. The battle had ended not in destruction, but in containment, and the city breathed again. So what was this battle really about? It was never just about demons. It was about authority. Solomon believed wisdom could keep darkness under control. That understanding meant safety. That proximity to God meant immunity. But the story exposes a dangerous truth. Wisdom without obedience is unstable. Knowledge without humility is vulnerable. Authority without alignment will always fail. The 72 spirits were not just enemies Solomon faced. They were forces he underestimated, because the greatest threat was never their power. It was Solomon's confidence. The moment he believed he could manage what God alone restrains, the foundation cracked. And that is why Michael's intervention matters. Michael did not come because Solomon was weak. He came because Solomon was human. Even the wisest man who ever lived could not stand alone against systemic corruption. That is the warning. This battle reveals something deeply uncomfortable. Evil does not need to overpower us. It only needs us to relax vigilance. It waits for compromise. It waits for distraction. It waits for the moment we confuse permission with ownership. The 72 represent more than ancient spirits. They represent recurring human struggles: pride, desire, fear, anger, despair, control. And the story reminds us of something critical. We are not meant to fight these battles alone. Solomon needed intervention. Israel needed protection. And so do we. Michael's role is not about spectacle. It is about reminding us where authority truly comes from. Not from intelligence, not from position, not from reputation, but from alignment with God. And when alignment is restored, chaos loses its grip. Not because it disappears, but because it is restrained. That is the real victory. And here is the final question this story leaves us with. If even Solomon needed heaven to step in, what makes us think we don't? Solomon's story is often told as a tragedy, but Scripture hints at something far more disturbing, because his fall didn't end with him. It echoed forward into Israel, into exile, and into patterns we still see today. In the next episode, we trace how Solomon's choices reshaped biblical history and why the warning still applies now.